So for this workshop, we're going to be creating Catty. And what Catty is it's a super cute web app that gives you awesome pictures of cats. And this right here is the front end of Catty. So it's going to be the final product. And with all the categories of cats, put text in, put rotate, and put flip. And so let's do that right now. We can put a cute cat in here with the text hi there. And we can rotate it 2 degrees. We can flip it if we want, but I don't want to flip it because that just gets really disorientating. So once we click submit, this is actually going to call our AWS Lambda endpoint. And once that happens, we get a picture of a super cute cat back. And we can actually first head to AWS console and just go into AWS management console. So click log back in. It'll take you back to your, it's going to take you to your AWS console. So what we're going to be using is Cloud9. And what Cloud9 basically is it's an online IDE that allows you to create code straight from your browser. So that you don't have to worry about like things not working on your computer, but working on mine, because it's all straight from the browser and it's super awesome that way. So if we want to get to Cloud9, that once you type in Cloud9 in the search bar, that should be the first search result that comes back. And if you just click on it, you're going to get taken to Cloud9 right here. And yours might actually look blank because you haven't created any environment yet. I'm going to just create a new one right here. And that's this big orange button right here. And what we can do is name ours Catty. And we don't need to write a description, but if you want to, you can. We can leave this all as defaults because we don't really need to mess with that. AWS gives us pretty good settings for them. And after that, we can just click create environment. So this will take a second because it's just going to get everything ready and then connect us to our Cloud9 server. And it says it can take a few minutes. Once we're at Cloud9, what we're going to do first is we're actually going to modify this like layout real quick to make it easier, at least in my opinion, to use and to create AWS Lambda functions. So what you want to do is, if you see this cloud icon in the top left corner, what you want to do is click on that. And I'll actually make my screen zoom in a little bit so it's easier to read. And if you just click on this Cloud9 and then go into preferences, it will take you to this settings page. And what you want to do is scroll all the way down until you see AWS settings. And once you click there, you're going to see AWS resources. And what we're actually going to disable is AWS toolkit right here. So if we just click that to disable it, it's going to reload our page. And if you don't see anything that's changed, it does look really similar. But what the key thing is with this difference is that there's a Lambda button on this right side, which is what we're going to need to create our AWS Lambda function. Once we have this configured, what we're going to do is actually set up our Lambda template. And in order to create the Lambda function, what we can do is create this, click on this icon that I was talking about, and it kind of looks like an A. And if we just click on that, that's going to open up this right panel for us. And if we look closely, we see another thing that looks super similar, except there's a plus sign on it. And if you hover over it, it says create a new Lambda function. So let's click on that. We can just name it Catty. And it's going to give us our application name automatically because it's like, we're pretty smart. We're going to give it the same name as your function name. So if we do that, we can just leave it as it is because that's completely fine for us. The language that we're actually going to use, which is what we're choosing right here, is we're going to use Node.js.
If you think about regular JavaScript, that's what runs in the front end of websites. So like say you were curious one day, you clicked inspect element on your browser and you had all this code show up. If you see JavaScript code, that's JavaScript, that's not Node.js. I think the biggest difference to differentiate between them, like I said before, is front end and back end. Using Node.js, when it's running on the back end, you can import NPM packages. You can import all kinds of different things that other people have written to repurpose for your code. And on the other hand, in JavaScript, that's on the front end. You won't be able to import any of that stuff. Everything that's compatible with JavaScript has to be included in the browser. So once again, I'm just going to reiterate front end versus back end when you're thinking about whether to choose JavaScript or Node.js.
With that said, what we're going to do is we're going to use Node.js, which is the backend language. And then what we're actually going to use to trigger our serverless function is it's going to be an API gateway. So what this basically means is this API gateway is going to give us a super nice URL that we can use to actually like hit our Lambda function. And what that means is that's how we're going to access it. So for our resource path, we can just put / because we're not going to have any other resources other than like this Catty function for right now. And for security, we don't need any security because we want to be able to access this from any URL. And we can leave this as default, click next. just make sure all this is right here, like what my screen says, and we can click finish. And what that will do is it's going to spit out this super nice Lambda template for us. And what it basically says is exports.handler. So when this Lambda function is called, it's going to go into here. It's going to have 3 parameters right here, and then it's going to take a callback. But this isn't exactly what we need. It's really close, but it's not exactly. So what we're going to do is add async here in front of this. And this just lets our Lambda function know that we're actually going to return something and that we're going to be doing stuff asynchronously. So it knows not to just stop when we get to the end of the program. It knows that there's asynchronous stuff happening. And with that, we don't actually need these other 2 parameters right here, context or callback, because we can do that straight in exports.handler. So what we can do is delete this and then just leave event. And what we can do is actually return hello world from our Lambda function right here. So what we can say is return, and then in the body, we can say hello world, and then put an exclamation point. And if you're on a Windows computer, you can say Control S. And since I'm on Mac, I'm going to do Command S. And that's going to take away that bubble right there. And if we click run, that's actually going to pop up this window right here. And if we click run again, it's going to send a request, or this is going to be like a mock request to our API endpoint right here. So it's going to be loading for a second. And once it does load, it's going to give us back, hopefully hello world, because that is what we're returning. Yeah, so right here, we see body, which is what we have right here, and then hello world. So this right here is a JSON object. And Emily, do you want to explain what a JSON object is real quick?
Yes. A JSON object, simply put, is a way to store and retrieve data when you're using a programming language. So this is typically used in JavaScript. If you've ever used dictionaries in Python before, it's kind of similar to that as well. So what Ganning has returned here is a JSON bracket. I always say to people, if you're trying to identify JSON, always look for the curly brackets. And when you're looking at a JSON object, you might see something like object.key. That's how to access an attribute. So in this case, body would be an attribute. And just one more thing I wanted to add on to that. Ganning just, did that mock request. He hit that endpoint. The code was loading. Right then and there, it was running in a container somewhere in the cloud.
Yeah, so once we have edited this Lambda template to return hello world, we're actually going to want to return a cat image back, right? Because that's what our website does. If you recall, if we click submit, it would give us a super cute cat image. So what we're going to use to give us a cat image back is going to be the cat as a service API. So the endpoint for that is if we just go type cataas, that should be the first link that pops up. If you just click on that, it will take a second, but once it loads, it will give you a bunch of cats, 675 cats to be precise, that it has in its database. So if you want to get a random cat, let's just look at its documentation right here. And it says this endpoint, so /cat will return a random cat. So if we just click this button right here, it makes it super easy. We just get this URL and we can copy that. And just to prove that it's random, if we refresh it, it's going to give you another cat. Refresh it again. Oh, that's a really cool cat. But yeah, so this URL will actually give us a random cat every time. And we can close that. And if we just want to return that in the body, what we can do is just put that in the curly braces, right? So if we recall, when we had hello world here, that showed up there. So just going by that like an example, kind of, if we return this URL here, when we run it, we will actually get back the cat as a service API endpoint. So just to prove that it works, we can copy this, paste it, we get another cat. Oh, that's so cool. And here's another cat. Yeah, as you can see, I really like cats. So yeah. And once we have this done, the goal of our app is actually to manipulate our cat image, right? So the way we're going to do that is with an npm package called jimp. So share, Emily, what is an npm package? Like what is it? What does it do? What are the benefits of using one?
That's a
Sure,
great
do you want to
question.
take
Emily,
this
do you
one?
want to go? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll take it. So NPM is like the node package manager. When you're using Node.js, there's a lot of methods that don't already exist in it, but there's a bunch of really cool developers like around the world that have created their own methods, and you can access those through different packages that they've created. So you can use npm to install those packages, use those methods, and then life is easier.
So let me give an example. Let's say you are developing a website that transforms cats into dogs. And then you were like, well, I don't want to write the code to transform a cat into a dog. So then you can Google something like transform cat into dog npm package. And usually something would pop up and you would just be able to install it and then use it in your code and life was all good. Just a warning, I'm pretty sure there isn't an npm package that transforms cat into dogs. So yeah, if there
I guess
was,
that's gonna be Ganning's next project.
Oh, we'll see. I'll try to take on that. But yeah, so the npm package that we're actually going to need to use is called jimp. And lucky for you, you don't need to go out and search for it because we've already done that for you. And what jimp basically does is it's an image editing npm package. So what that means is you can rotate the image, flip it, add text to it, basically everything that we need to do in our website. So to install the npm package, what we can do is, if you notice on the bottom of your screen, you have this black window right here. And what this is actually called is it's called the terminal. So what you can do is you can actually type commands in here, right? So this white block thing is what's your cursor, right? So this might look a little new to you if you haven't done coding before, but if you want to just see what's in your current directory or folder right now, you can type ls. And as you can see, we have our function or our application caddy, and we also have our readme.md file, and that's just about what this application is about. So to install jimp, what we can do is cd, which is change directory, into our application, and then let's just see what's in here again. And surprise, we have another folder called caddy. And this is just because we had our application name and our function name the same, right? So what we can do is cd into caddy again. You can say ls. Now we have index.js. And what index.js is, if you see it, look at right up here, this is index.js. So now we're actually in the folder where this file is. So this is how like everything connects together, right? So right now in this terminal, we're in this the directory or the folder. When I say directory and folder, they refer to the same thing. So once we're in here, we can actually say npm init -0-y. And what that does is it basically gets our folder ready for npm installs. So just as a general rule, do that before you do npm install something. And so once we've done npm init-y, what we can say is npm install jimp. And what that will do is, as you can see, this is going to actually load for a second, and it's going to go fetch, or it's going to go download the jimp package from npm. And jimp is, like Emily said, it's code that other people have written, but that we can use because they've made it open source. So what we can say is, in our code, if we want to use jimp in our code, what we can say is const jimp is equal to require jimp. And would one of you, Shreya or Emily, like to go over like what is that syntax? Like what is const, what is jimp, what is require, and like what that line basically does?
Sherry, do you want to give that a shot?
Yeah, I was gonna ask actually like why we're putting it outside of the function, but basically in this case, once you've installed the npm package, you want to be able to refer to all of like the methods and everything that's inside of it. So when you're doing const jimp, you're just creating a variable that says anytime I refer to jimp or to this like methods in this package, I want to call it jimp, and then that's what it's going to like precede any other method that you're going to use. And then when you do the equals to require with the brackets jimp, that's actually referring to what you just installed. So the jimp with a capital J is like your version of the npm package, if that makes sense. And like if you have like a better way of explaining that.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And adding on to that, you could say like for example, remember that computers they do exactly what you tell them to. So if let's say Ganning didn't use the require statement and he was trying to use the jimp package, well, the computer doesn't know where to get that code from. You're just saying jimp. It's like, okay, what jimp? Where jimp? So by using that require statement, you're telling the computer, hey, I need to require this npm package I just installed in package.json, and I need that in my code. So you're telling the computer, this is jimp. This is where jimp is. This is how I want to use jimp.
Also, just to backtrack, that package.json file was created when Ganning ran the npm init-y command. So it automatically created the package. And every time you do npm install something, it'll be added in there. But yeah,
Exactly.
Ganning, you can go ahead and continue.
Yeah, so once we have jimp right here, what we're going to use with jimp is, let's just first add hello world onto our image. So what we can do is, let's create another function for this, because in coding, it's typically good practice to have functions that do one thing and one thing specifically. So this function is actually going to just manipulate our image for us. So what we can say is async function manipulate image, img, like that. And what we want to pass in here, so what we're going to have in these parentheses is what's known as function arguments. And we can have Emily go over that in a second while we test this. But first, let's just go through the code first. So what we can say is cat URL in here. So when we call this function, we're going to need to pass in a cat URL. And you'll see what I mean by that in a second, because I'm just talking about this abstractly and it might sound confusing. So now in order to actually read or to manipulate our image, we're going to need to create an image object by jimp, right? So what we can say is say const image is equal to await. Let me just confirm the syntax real quick. So it's await jimp.read cat URL. So this is actually going to read the image that we passed in through cat URL, and it's going to store it in this variable or constant image. So in order to add text to it, the syntax is await image dot, let's see. Actually, scratch that. What we need to do first is we're actually going to need to load a font, right? Because with text, there's a billion options. You can choose this font, or this font. You can also have a lot of sizes of fonts. So we need to specify a font that we're going to use. So we can just say.
Real quick, before you go into the font stuff,
yeah.
I saw that you decided to make this function asynchronous. Could you kind of explain why you made that decision, or what would happen if you hadn't done that?
Yeah, so this function is asynchronous because within this function, we're going to be using stuff that is going to actually take a while. And when I mean stuff, it's actually going to be like the manipulate image stuff, or like when we're adding text, rotating it, flipping it. And that is actually going to take a while. So jimp has it so that those functions are asynchronous. So if we want to use the await keyword, which is like, we're going to stop and wait for this action to finish, we need to add async in front. And the reason they made it asynchronous is because jimp is probably calling external APIs to do like a lot of manipulating of the image, and it might be theirs, it might not be. So adding async is just good practice, or we need to add async here because we're using external services, which is jimp right here. And Emily, is that all correct? Correct me if I'm wrong.
That was a pretty good explanation. And just adding on to that, like think about so what JavaScript is, it's called a synchronous language. So what it does is it runs every single line of code. So executes, 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 executes. So let's say Ganning was trying to get jimp to do something, right? And jimp doesn't do it right away. Like it doesn't go like, and then gives you the result. So if we just skipped over the line and didn't wait for jimp, we wouldn't have the image. We would have like nothing, and we can't do anything with nothing. So that's literally what the await means. It means wait. We have to wait for jimp. And once jimp says, okay, we're good, then we can move on. So that's why we're basically telling JavaScript we want to be asynchronous instead of synchronous.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you have something to add to that, Shreya? Sorry, I just saw you unmuted.
No. I was just going to say, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay, perfect. So like I said, we're going to need to actually load a font and choose a font that we're going to use, right? So what we can say is const font is equal to await jimp.load font, and make sure, jimp.load font, not just jimp load font. So capital J, make sure that we have it as that, because right here we said capital Jim or capital J IMP. So make sure that like this capitals matter, because in code, they're very nitpicky, right? So a lowercase and a capital is not the same thing. They're going to refer to two different things, right? So jimp right here is capitalized, the J in jimp, and F in load font is capitalized. So what we're actually going to pass in here is something that jimp has, and it's called jimp.font_sans_64_white. And this is a little bit small, so let me expand this real quick. And what this basically means is that we're going to get a font right here, and which the font is sans 64, which is the size, and it's going to be white. And we're going to use white because if you recall, in our Caddy app, our background is dark, right? So a white text is going to show up really nicely. And what we can do is go back here and let's put a semicolon because that's good practice. And then what we can say is await image.print. So if you've ever used Python, this is very similar. So it's just going to print some text onto the image right here. And image, remember, we defined that up there. So what we can say is the first argument we're going to pass in is a font. So we can just type font. And then the next one is going to be the X coordinate and the Y coordinate. So just to make this simple, we can just say 50, 50. So it's going to be the top left corner of the image, but 50 units down and 50 units to the right. And the last argument to this is the text that we're actually going to pass in, right? So what we can say is hello world. And that is going to just write the text hello world onto the image. And if we want to return this image as a base 64 string, and what a base 64 string is, it's going to be a string representation of an image, right? So we can, once we actually call this function, we're going to return this base 64 string to the user. And Emily, would you like to explain why we have to use base 64 instead of because why can't we just return the image as itself, right? Like, what's preventing us from doing that?
That's a great question. So if you just return the image as itself, I don't know if any of you have, looked at what an image actually is in terms of if you print it out in regular ASCII, which is just regular characters, it looks like gibberish. It's just binary data, because if you think about it, everything you're watching us right now, all of this is just zeros and ones. And we need a way to represent that in a string form, like Ganning said, base 64. And there's something really handy in HTML. You can take base 64 and actually turn it and display it as an image. So that's exactly why we are returning it base 64. It's a way to display it on the website.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great response. So in order to actually get the base 64 string from this image right here, after we printed hello world on it, there's a special line that jimp uses, and it's image.getBuffer. And make sure it's not get, it's get buffer. And then make sure the B is capitalized in buffer. And then what we can say is jimp.mime_png. And that just means we want to return it in a PNG format. And the second argument to this is actually a callback. And what a callback is it's basically another function. So right here, we can pass in one argument, which is ERR, which stands for error. We can also pass in buffer, which is exactly what we want. So what we can say is in here, let's actually declare a variable called response. And that's just going to represent our base 64 string. So we can say let response right up there. And what we can copy and paste that, and we can say response is equal to buffer.from buffer, so lowercase buffer right here, but make sure that this first one is uppercase, so buffer.from buffer, which this buffer is actually this argument in the callback, so that's where that comes from. And buffer right here is actually a keyword. So we can say buffer.from buffer.toString, and then in here we can say base 64. And base 64 is a keyword that tells us that we want to return it in base 64 format. And it's actually yelling at us right now. And it says, expect error to be handled. And if you just hover over that, you can see it. And what that basically means is that since we're passing in error right here, it's going to want us to handle it if we do get an error. So we can say if ERR, just return, because if there's an error, we don't want to do this because we know something went wrong. And when things go wrong, that's bad. And we don't like bad things. So we're just going to quit out of this function right here, or that callback. So right after that, we can just say return response. And so right now, this is our complete manipulate image function. For right now, that will add hello world onto the image. And what we can say is, we can delete this comment that says to do implement. So what we can say is const base 64 string is equal to, or base 64 capital STR. And then what we can say is await, copy this function name, manipulate image, And what we're going to pass in right here, if we recall, is a cat URL. And where did we get the cat URL from? This API right here. So if we just click get random cat, it's going to take a second to spin up. And then we can take this URL right here, pass that in, right? Whoops, not enter. Pass that in right there. And now save it. And then what we actually need to do is return base64 string. So let's return that. So let's return base64 string, click run. And it will actually, it's going to call this. And what you can see here is something that looks a lot like gibberish, right? But this is actually what Emily was talking about with the base64 string. So this is actually like a binary, or correct me if I'm wrong, this is binary representation of it, right, Emily?
So it's it turned the binary into a string representation. So it's a
Oh,
string.
right. So that's where we went from
Exactly.
buffer to
Exactly.
base64,
Yeah,
right?
that's
So
what
this is actually the string representation of the binary. Yes. Okay, awesome. So this is a string representation. And what's super awesome is that there's a lot of like online converters out there that will convert this to a actual image for us. So if we want to just see that in action, what we can do is we actually want to deploy our function, right? So if you go into the caddy with an arrow next to it, we can click on that, right click on, or just click on this orange Lambda icon right here, right click and click deploy. And it will show these 3 dots, and it just means that it's deploying. And yeah, this might take a second.
So while it's deploying, what do you guys think happens? What do you guys think happens when you're deploying your code? Does anyone want to take a guess about, what happens? What is AWS doing? Where does it go? Where do you think it goes?
So right now, I believe that the code is like, it's here, but it's kind of local in the sense that only we have access to it. No one else has access to it. But when you're deploying that code, you're kind of taking it to a different place where if someone else wants to get access to it and use the same function, they can.
That's like a great general description of it. What about you, Ganny?
When I think about like deploying it, like Shreya said, it's allowing other people to use it, right? But even as like programmers, I guess, or developers, I just click the deploy button, or I do it through the terminal. I don't really think about like what goes on behind the scenes, right? Because I haven't really looked into that. So do you want to give us some insight on like what actually happens when we click deploy?
Of course. I totally agree with Ganny. When I first started working with serverless functions, I just clicked the cloud and then it worked. So, I didn't, think about what happened. But what does happen is once you click deploy, AWS is going to go ahead and package your code. It's going to create a little container for it, and it's going to ship it off to the cloud. And now, since your code is now in the cloud, whenever someone needs to access it, it's going to use the API gateway that we set up earlier. And whenever they, hit that URL, the container is going to run the code, and then they'll be able to access it. So they're not going to be running the IDE that you see here right now. They're going to be running a container of code that Ganning just wrote. It's in the cloud somewhere.
Wait, so what exactly does the API gateway do?
Ganning, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so what the API gateway basically does is, since AWS uses this Lambda function, and usually in something like Azure Functions, that will actually give us a URL like directly off the bat when we deploy it. But with AWS, they give us something that's called an API gateway. And that's actually what we're going to do right now. But basically, in a short overview, API gateway is how we're going to access this Lambda function, right? So what that's going to do, the API gateway is going to give us a URL. And what that URL will do is if we hit it with like a request, then it's going to actually run this code right here, which is in our Lambda function. So the AWS gateway allows us to access this function. Right, Emily?
Awesome. And before you continue, real quick, we have a bunch of different like methods that we're using out of jimp, which we talked about as an npm package and everything. But if we, while we're developing it, following you, if we want more information about like these specific methods or any others that jimp has to offer, is there like a documentation that we can go to learn more?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked, because this is super awesome for students to know this, right? So if you just Google, because jimp is actually like a pretty popular package, what we can say is npm jimp. And if you just Google that, that will actually be the first link that comes up. So if you just click on this, The link is going to be npmjs.com/package/jimp if for some reason you can't find it. And this is the documentation for it. So if you just scroll through here, and what this basically is, it's a ton of examples that tell you what's happening, right? So jimp.read, which is, if you recall, that's what we use, right? So image, jimp.read right here. What we're reading from is actually a URL, which is like that. And this just gives us a general overview of jimp. And if you actually want to explore the source code behind that, what you can do is click this repository, click into new tab, and it will actually give you the source code behind jimp. So like what actually happens when we say image.read or like jimp.read image or like image.print? Like what actually happens? If you want to go through this, it might get a little complicated, but it's all in here. So if for any reason you want to look at it, this link right here, npmjs.com/package/jimp, is the documentation for it, and it's super good to follow along with. And here's the source code for it. And the URL is github.com/oliver/morin/jimp. Does that answer your question?
Awesome. That is perfect. Yeah. And if you're, sorry?
Yeah, I said I have a comment to make on that.
Yeah.
Sometimes the documentation isn't enough for me. So what I do is I Google for examples. So I could say like jimp example GitHub, exactly like that. And then there's going to be things that come up, people that have used it before, they have pre-written code. And a lot of times you can just copy paste and reuse it, honestly. I like to say a lot of developing applications is just copy pasting things from GitHub, Stack Overflow, Google, etc.
Yeah. Exactly. And if you guys are following this workshop and you decide like you want to do something that's a little bit more simpler than what Ganning's building or more complex, then going through the docs will help you kind of find your own unique, different project to make as well.
Yeah, awesome. So once this is deployed, what we're going to do is actually test it, right? So if we want to get our API gateway URL, we can just go into AWS console again. So just type that in your browser, click login. Let's move this tab here so it's easier. We can close all this. And then what we're actually want to do is let's go into our search bar again. And instead of searching for Cloud9, we can search for Lambda. So it's LAMBDA. And it's going to be the first link that comes up, Lambda right here. And if you get to this screen, you're on the right path. And look at all these beautiful charts they give us. So the place that we want to go is going to be this giant button right here. And it's a number. Yours is probably going to be 0 or 1 right now because you haven't created any yet. But mine is at 11 because I have a ton right here. And we're actually going to be going to the one that was last deployed super recently. So if we just look at the 6 minutes ago one, that would be the one that we just deployed. So if we just go into that one, we want to get our API gateway. And lucky for us, there's a big button that says API gateway. So let's click it, go into details, copy this, copy link address, and then go into Postman. And if you haven't, download Postman. Let's click reopen. And then what Postman does is it's basically a API mimicker. So eventually when we send requests to our endpoint through JavaScript in our front end, which is what we're going to be building last, we can actually mimic that by using Postman. So if we just send a GET request to this URL, click send, and remember, this is the deployed URL. So this is from the API gateway, and this is when we click send, it's actually going to be super cool, and it's going to run our code right here. And if we just click into this, you see that we've got this giant base64 string. And like Emily said, this is going to be the string representation of binary. So if you want to just verify that this is actually an image, there's this button right here in Postman. If you click it, it will say copy to clipboard. And in your browser, if you just search up base64 to image, you can go to probably any of these links, but they all work just fine. I like this one, in my opinion, code beautify. Paste it here. It might take a second because it's so like it's a giant string right here. It's probably, that's the exact number of how many characters there is. And that's a huge number that I don't want to try to pronounce because I'm going to mess that up. But here is the hello world on our cat, right? So this is 50 pixels down, 50 pixels from the left. And you get a super cute image of a cat right here laying on a phone with hello world on it. So even though this may seem super simple, this is actually like one of the biggest steps in getting our function done because we're able to edit our image now. So If you recall, in our Caddy app, we had something called. Wait, Emily, did you want to add something to this? I saw you
Yes, I
unmuted.
actually have a question. So for
Go for it.
students who don't have Postman, where do you suggest them to get it?
Yeah, so if you haven't downloaded Postman yet, what you can do is go into a new tab and just search up Postman download desktop app. And if you just Google that, it should be the first link. It's going to be, if it loads, it's going to be postman.com/downloads. So postman.com, it's postman.com/downloads. And from right here, you should be able to just click this big orange button right here that says download the app. And if you're on a Windows machine, it's going to be pretty smart and it's going to give you the Windows version of it. And that's just the website being super intelligent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's get back to the new feature that you're going to talk about on the website.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to implement flip and rotate. And if you recall on our Caddy app, what we had was we had a place to add text. So right now we can add hello world to it. And that is, I want to say like that's 50% of getting this text feature working. Because all we need to do now is get user input for it. And it's not that difficult. You'll see later on how we do that. And what we can say here is we have rotate and flip. And don't worry, jimp does this all for us. So what we can do is go back to our function. And within here, we can just add, actually, we should actually rotate and flip the image before we add text, right? Because we don't want lopsided text that's super hard to read. And that's going to make my eyes hurt because that is bad. So we're going to flip the image and rotate it before we add the text. And the syntax to rotate image is going to be, you guessed it, await image dot rotate. Ta-da! It's beautiful. So what this takes is it's going to be just a integer, right? So what you can say is, Emily, how many degrees do you want to rotate this? Give me anything you want.
30.
30, great number. So we can say image dot rotate 30, and make sure to don't put quotes here because we want this to be an integer. And there's a distinction between strings and integers in programming. And Shreya, would you like to give us like an overview of like what's the difference between like if the number 30 in quotes versus like 30 like that? So what's the difference right here?
That's a great point. So if you put it in quotes, it's going to literally take it as the string. It's not going to realize that it's an actual number. So that 30 could be the same as you put in cat or dog or some other random word or anything in there. Versus if you put the 30, you can see it's even like colored differently. It's like, oh, cool, that's a number. I understand that. I can do, like compute something with it. I did have a question real quick. Is rotate just a general method or is that a jimp method?
Yeah, so rotate is actually a jimp method because right here, if you recall, we're actually going to say jimp.read cat URL, and we're going to store that in image, right? So image is actually going to be an instance of this jimp image object. And when we say image.rotate, we're going to access the image object's rotate method. And that's going to rotate the image for us. So it's native to jimp. It's not something that's built into like Node.js. Does that answer your question?
Gotcha. Yes.
Awesome. So once we rotated our image, what we can say is flip image, right? So the syntax to flip the image, you guessed it, it's super simple. It's image.flip, right? So super self-explanatory. And this is actually going to be pretty interesting because you can flip it two directions, right? You can flip something like this way. So that's going to be across the y-axis. But you can also flip it like this way, if that makes sense. I'll use my phone as an example. So you can flip it this way, or you can flip it this way. And that's two different directions. And since there's two different directions that we can do it in, there's going to be two different arguments to this method right here. So if we want to rotate it horizontally, which is going to be like this for our sake, so we're going to rotate it across the y-axis, that's actually going to be the first argument. So if we want to rotate it horizontally, we can say true right here. But if we also want to rotate it vertically, so that's going to be in this direction like this, so across the x-axis, that is going to be the second argument. So if we want to rotate it both directions, we can say true, true. But if we only want to rotate it vertically, we can say false, true. So remember, this first argument is a horizontal flip. Second argument is a vertical flip. So just to keep that here, we can say first arg is horizontal flip. second arg is vertical flip. And Emily, do you want to go over like what are these like slashes that I'm typing, right? Because this isn't valid JavaScript syntax if it didn't have these slashes right here, right? So like why are those slashes so magical, and like why do we need them? What do they do?
That's a great question. So the slash is right there in that JavaScript code, or you can also call it Node.js, since we're working on backend. They're called comments. And what they do is they allow you to type like whatever you want inside of code without it, the compiler trying to run it. So let's say Ganning, try typing the code without the slash, like just like keyboard smash. Did you see that little underline? It says, bro, like the code said, you can't do that. So now try commenting that out by putting in 2 slashes. Beautiful. Now there's no errors anymore, and Gannon can keyboard smash all he wants. And when he runs it, it'll still run and no errors will pop up. So unfortunately, commenting in code is not for keyboard smashing when you're like frustrated that the code doesn't work. It's actually for, telling other programmers and even yourself what the point of that specific line of code is. Like, what does this section do? And as you can see, Ganning has added some very helpful comments. He said, hey, this is for rotate image. This is for flip image. That's for adding text. So in case Ganning comes across this, 5 years later, he's like, oh, what does this do? He can just read the comments. Or let's say someone's reading his example code. They can say, okay, I need to use this line of code because it rotates the image. So basically, those 2 lines or slashes, whatever you want to call them, actually make life easier for a lot of people and even yourself.
Yeah, great answer. So once we've rotated, flipped, add text to this image, we need to deploy this because we need to make sure this all works. And I'm not just bluffing, being like, yeah, it works, trust me on this. So we're going to deploy it and just wait for it to see. And then once it deploys, we're going to test it again and see what it does. It takes a while to deploy.
Deployment dance with like music in the background.
Jeopardy.
This is like the fun part, huh? You're just sitting and waiting for it to deploy.
Yeah, it's. Oh, I guess right here, this would be a pretty good opportunity to explain like why does there not need to be strings or like quotes around base 64 string, right? Because it's not yelling at us, it's not giving us any errors here, right? But there's no strings around it. So like, why does this give us like, why does this yell at us? But like, if I say like base 64 string right here and body, why does that not yell at us? Like, why is that valid? But why is this invalid, right? Because it looks the same to me, right? They're both text. What's the difference?
That is a great question, Ganning. And I think the best way to answer it is, look at where these 2 different things are placed. So if you see base 64 string, that thing's valid because you placed it in front of body. And on top of that, you also define it as a variable. So right now in the code's looking at the keyboard smash, it's like, I don't know what that is. You didn't define it as a variable. You're not assigning it to any value, and exactly the frowny face just pulls it off. So in code, remember the computer does exactly what you tell it to do, and you have to tell it every detail. It cannot assume anything. We're not at that level of intelligence yet, and if we do get there, I think that'll be kind of scary. But at this point, we haven't gotten there yet.
Yes, and that's a really good thing. So once we've deployed, you see that there's no more 3 loading dots. And what that means is that it's done. So if we just head back into Postman, we can send another request. And it's going to take a second because it's going to send back a giant string that's like thousands of characters long. So while it's sending, we can just wait. And yeah, so we get another seemingly the same string, but it's not the same. And I can promise you that because once we go back into base64 the image, paste that in. It's going to take a second, hopefully. And interesting. Okay, it didn't rotate our image for some reason. And why is that? Okay, so it added hello world, but it didn't rotate our image. So let's see, what went wrong there? Oh wait, image dot rotate, base64 string, manipulate image. Let's take a look. Let's debug this together. Oh wait, image dot rotate, wait, image dot print. Let's see. Let's see what's up. Flip true. Let's just try sending it again, because let's make sure that it's just like not a one-time thing. Because okay, let's copy this and then let's go back into here and let's paste it in. That's an interesting cat, but okay, it's still not rotated. So let's figure out why this is not rotating. So await font. So we're gonna flip the image right here. This is so interesting. Did I not save it? Maybe that's the issue. I might have not saved it. So
is there like a bubble?
Remember
like, you know,
there was a bubble up there, but
oh,
I might have not just
press
saved it.
save and then
Yeah, so I might have deployed it without saving it. So now let's right click and deploy it again, because
I think that's
that
what
might happen.
Because your code looks really,
yeah, I think it's right as well. So just save it and make sure to save it and don't make the same mistake as I do, and then deploy it.
Does this have like an autosave option?
I'm actually not sure. Does it have an autosave option?
Because I know if anyone has used Visual Studio Code before, it's really cool. It autosaves for you, just like Google Drive.
Yeah, autosave is a lifesaver. I literally used to just like.
I don't know how people like live without autosave. Because I would just forget to save it, and I'm just like, okay, let's close this.
And then you're testing, and you're like, oh, there's a bug.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's deployed again, and let's just send another request to it. Let's send it, and then it'll give us a response. Let's just wait for it. Okay, now let's copy that, go back here, refresh it, paste it again. And yeah, so the issue was that I didn't save it. Yay, thank you for the claps. But here's a super cute cat, right? It's licking its paw, and it's rotated, and it has hello world on it. And you might notice that it's kind of super hard to read, right? Like, how can you read this against a white background? So if you remember, like I said before, we're doing it against a black background, or not a black background, but a dark background, so that like if we go into our website again, remember this is dark, so this will actually show up super nicely. So we don't need to worry about that. But so right now we can add text, rotate it, flip it. What we need to do now is we're actually going to need to implement the way that you're able to get a category for the cat, right? So actually scratch that. That wouldn't make sense to do right now. What we need to do now is get user input. So the user needs to be able to say whether they want to say like, hi Ganning on it, or like, hi Emily, or hi Shreya, or like, I'm the best on the image, right? So what we can say is, we can say function get request obj, and what we can just pass in is event. And if this looks cryptic to you, event, this is just a function declaration exactly like this, except we're not using async because we're not going to reference any external APIs or anything here. So what we can say is the way that they're going to pass this, the way that we're going to get user input for this is actually through the query string. And what that basically means is if you've ever been on a website and it goes like example, we're just going to use example.com as an example, obviously. So what we can say is question mark username is equal to Dave, and password is equal to 1234. Hopefully they don't just say that because that's super easy. That's not very secure, at least in my opinion. But what a query string basically is it's this part right here, right? So username is equal to Dave. So the username is the key, Dave is the value, and password is the key, 1234 is the value. And it's important to note that all these values right here are strings. So even if username was true, that would not evaluate to true in JavaScript. That's going to be a string containing true. And that might seem like, why am I talking about this? But it will come into play later. So what we can do is from here, event is actually a pretty interesting thing because AWS is going to actually package that and put it in a nice, pretty JSON object for us to access. So what we can say is const text is equal to event. And the syntax for this is, let me just confirm it. It's going to be, make sure you put brackets right here and then double quotes or single quotes work fine as well, actually. So you can say query and then capital S for string and then parameters. And this is going to get all the query string parameters in that query string. So in our example, username and password. So after this, if we want to only extract username, we can say username. But we don't need username. We need text, right? So we can just replace that with text. Put a semicolon there. And what we can say is, whoops, not just an empty JSON object. We can just say return text. And this is actually shorthand right here. So if you notice right here, we have a key and a value. So body is the key, base64 is the value to this JSON object. But this right here is a shorthand. And okay, so in our code, why is this valid, right? Because right here we have body, and then that's the key. The value is base64 string with a colon. And it seems like we're doing the same thing, right? Braces, but we don't have a colon anymore. So what does that mean? Why is this okay as well?
Well, okay, so that's a great question. And recall that I talked about JSON earlier. It's really just a difference in the way that you're returning things and also just general good practice. So on the top there, when we're returning it in body, that's what we're returning from the entire function. That's what the API is returning. And in general, when we're returning from APIs, we want to return our response in body. So usually people are going to say, okay, response.body, and they're going to be able to retrieve whatever you return to them. That's just best practice. And our second function, which Ganning just wrote, you're able to just return the variable text because that's still a variable. Notice that he didn't put quotations around it. There's actually content inside of text. And that's honestly just how you return from any other JavaScript function that you write. You could also do it actually without the curly brackets, I believe, and that would also work. Do you want to try that?
Yeah, so you can also return this as well. But just for this, we're actually going to return it with the curly brackets because we're also going to need category and just returning in a JSON object with
so
the overall like simpler.
Is putting it in curly brackets is because he wants to return the information as represented as a JSON object.
On line 13, what would happen if we, like, can we just throw async in there just to be like, oh, in case we have to wait, or would that not work?
It actually does throw an error, like in certain cases. So just for best practice, everyone, don't use async unless you are dealing with await inside of your functions. If you're awaiting for something. If all you're doing is returning information that is and it's stored in a variable that you don't need to wait for, don't use async. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Shreya.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah, so once we're returning, and just remember, we're going to return this. Whoops, I did not mean to delete that. We're going to return this as a JSON object. So let's just indent this, click enter, and we're going to return this as a JSON object. And internally, what this really looks like is when we're only doing one like keyword right there, it's actually going to translate to that right there. So it's going to have the text key right here and the text value right here. So right here, it's going to be a key called text. And the value of that text is going to be what we passed in this variable. So just since this is duplicated and they're the same key and value variable, so we can just return text like that and it looks super clean and simple. And what we can do up here is we want to get this request object, right? So what we can say is const request obj is equal to, copy this function name because I don't want to spell that wrong. And then event, right? Because we want to pass an event. And what we can say is in this base64 string, when we're calling manipulate image, we can pass in request objects right here and request obj, obviously with a capital O. And if we do it there, remember we have to do it here as well. So if we actually want to access the value, and just remember that this right here is actually request obj because we're going to return that. And when we're returning it from this function, that's going to be stored in request obj. So if we're actually going to want to access the text key right here, instead of printing hello world, what we need to do is say request obj dot text. So that's where like jimp dot read comes from, or jimp dot load font. What we're going to say right here is request obj dot text. So we're going to access the text query string parameter, right? And what we can do is actually test this locally. So instead of Lambda local, we need to go to API gateway local, because that allows us to add query string parameters. So what we can do here is, let's look at the example they gave us. So param1 is equal to value. And then what we can say is, I don't want to spell this wrong. So text is equal to, let's just say, hello, quick run. I want to test this locally before I deploy it, because since deploying does take a while, I don't want to like waste everyone's time and show a function that doesn't work. So we see that we get a valid base64 string back. We don't know that it's actually going to contain what we have on there. So we're going to make sure, and we're going to do that by deploying it. So this is going to take around, I don't even know how long has deploying been taking?
I think it's varied.
Yeah.
Depending on when we try to deploy it. And just adding on to what Getting said, it's always best practice to test locally before you deploy things. Because one, you're wasting your time. And two, if you're out working at an actual, company and you're working with a team and you deploy something, they're like, oh, like, hey, let's test this. And when they test it, it doesn't work. That's kind of embarrassing, So when you always want to commit your code, you want to save it, test it locally, and then when you're sure that it works, that's when you deploy it to either a testing branch, or you actually deploy it to production where people are actually going to use it.
Another question, when you're deploying it, is it only deploying the changes that you made, or is it just redeploying the entire code?
No, it's gonna take your entire thing and then push it into cloud. So yeah, it's not gonna check, ooh, what changed, like GitHub usually does. If any of you have used GitHub before, it's really cool. You can figure out what you changed in the code, what you deleted, what you added.
Yeah, so if you like have a program that's super complex that takes like 20 minutes to deploy, and then you make a tiny change and deploy it again, it's still going to take 20 minutes. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's just why it's super nice to test locally first to make sure everything works. And we don't want to have something that's broken and redeploy to production. So once we have this, we're actually going to head back in Postman and test this. And if you recall, we added a text category right here, right? So, and we had text equals hello. What we need to do here is mimic that basically. So if you go into the params tab, you have something called query params. And that's just Postman talk for query string or query string parameters. So if you recall, our key was called text. So we can put text value. We want to say hello. And if you look super closely, when you type stuff here, it's actually it's pushing that to the string right here. So if I just spam like that, you saw it just got added right there. So Postman does this automatically for you. So you can just type in this like nice UI, and it'll populate that query string for you. So once we click send, it's going to hit our API endpoint like before, and it's hopefully going to return something that says hello back to us. And it's going to take a second because it's a huge string. And that took 11.57 seconds according to Postman. So we copy that, go into here, paste it, and we get hello. I don't know if you can read that, but it's very faint, but it says hello. Thank you for the applause. I really appreciate it. But also, it's also rotated because if you recall right here, we haven't like commented any of this out. It's still rotated, it's flipped. And just to show you that I'm not like faking it and just making sure it does hello, I can put anything, right? So I can put like Dave, Bob, hello. And we send that. It's going to put Dave, Bob, hello on there, hopefully. So gonna copy it.
There's a Dave and Bob watching this workshop. Please say hi back.
Yeah, please say hi.
Yeah,
so if we
you
paste
are
that,
featured on this workshop.
yay. So we have Dave, Bob, hello, and it's rotated. It's not super disorientating, which is really important to me at least, because I don't like getting dizzy. And we get a image that's rotated, which is super awesome. So what's next for this? We need to implement rotate and flip as query string parameters. So if we just go off this as an example, we can guess what the others are going to be. So if we just want, we can just copy and paste that, and it's going to get mad at us because we've already declared text. So we can say rotate, and we can also say flip right here. Whoops, that is not meant to be flip. That is meant to be rotate. And then this is meant to be flip. And flip right here. So instead of just returning text, we want to say rotate, flip to add everything to that. And what we can say is, since we're already getting this entire request OBJ, we don't need to change anything here. And that's a super awesome thing about JSON, right? So that's why I chose to only return a JSON object. So we don't have to add like request, or we don't have to add like rotate, flip for every single new parameter that we're adding. So in here, what we can do is say, since if you recall when I was talking about request query string parameters always pass as a string, right? So we need to actually parse it into an integer. So since this right here, 30 is an integer, we need to get this rotate value and put it into an integer. So what we can say is const rotate deg, I guess, for degree. And then what you can say is parse int. And this is a JavaScript keyword, so we don't have to define that. It's a JavaScript function that's built in. It's PARSE, capital INT, open parentheses, and we can put in request obj dot rotate. That's going to take that value, put it into a integer. And we also need to do the same thing for flip, actually. So for flip, this is actually going to be a bit interesting, right? Because for flip, what we can pass in is going to be V, H, or B. And that might seem cryptic, but V stands for vertical flip, H stands for horizontal flip, B stands for both flip. So what we can say right here is if request obj dot flip is equals, so 3 equal signs, V, then we want to do a vertical flip. And if you remember, the syntax for that is, or the first argument is a horizontal flip, and the second argument, let me just make sure that, yeah, the first argument is a horizontal flip, and the second argument is a vertical flip. So false, true, no horizontal flip, we want a vertical flip. So that is going to be valid, or that's going to be correct for that. And usually, and what we want to do right here now is check again for horizontal flip. So if request, or else if, I should say, not if again. So we can say request obj dot flip is equals H. That's what we had it as. And then we can say if it's that, then we can say await image dot flip true false now, because we want to rotate it horizontally, but not vertically. And then else if request obj dot flip is equals B, we can say await image dot flip true, which, oh, that sounded really nice, true. But yeah, okay, that's a sidetrack. And then we can delete that line right there, and we can just close that. And this is actually going to get mad at us. Oh, flip is not defined. I meant to type false here, not flip. So horizontal flip across this, the y-axis right here, and not a vertical flip. And what we actually need to do is,
sorry,
yeah,
is this all like us just evaluating what the user is giving us, so the front end is going to make this request? Okay.
Yes, exactly. So this is what like the user is passing to us, right? So if you remember like this drop down right here, we had flip right here. So horizontal, vertical, both. So if when you put horizontal, it's going to translate that to H, vertical, V, B, both. So that's just like why we're doing VHB right there. And what we actually need to do is, remember we had an option where that the user never actually, they aren't required to pass in a They aren't required to pass in like flip, text, or anything. So what we can say is if request obj dot rotate right here, because we aren't sure they passed in rotate. Oh, wait, I'll get to that in a second. But what we can say is if request obj dot rotate, we can put this in here and just put that there, and then I actually had 30 right here, and that was hard coded, but we need to use rotate deck. So we just put that there. And what this basically means is that if the user passes in a value for request obj dot rotate and is not just like an empty string, so they left it blank, then it will evaluate to it. Then it will go into this if, because only if this is true, then will this execute. And when this is true, it's if any valid string is passed in, right? So like A, B, C, or like in our case, it's going to be a number, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if it's not, or if the string is blank, so if request obj dot rotate is a blank string, then it's going to evaluate to false. So we're not going to execute any of this code. So this will only execute if the user pass in a value for the rotate parameter. And if you recall, we had that exact same thing with text. So what's super cool is that copy and paste that, put that here, replace this with text, copy and paste this, put that right here, save it. Let's fix this indent so it looks kind of nice. And then save that. And then this should be able to take it if we don't put anything there. Yeah, so that looks all right to us. And what we need to do now is actually implement the way that the user is going to get a cat from a category. So if you recall, we had a way for the user to get a cat from any of these categories. So what we can do is say, after we get request obj event, what we need to do is actually, yeah, so we're going to do it after this right here. So we can say const cat URL is equal to get cat request obj. Request obj. So why is it yelling at us? Cat URL. Oh, okay. So just saying that we're not using it yet, but we're going to do that in a second. So don't worry about that for now. And what we can say here is function get cat. We can put in request obj because that's what we're passing in here. And then also, you don't have to name these the exact same. I'm just doing it so it doesn't get confusing at all. But like this can be called like Dave, but this has to be called Dave as well. So just make sure that if you're going to name something different, keep it consistent. So it's super easy to do. But yeah, so just like right here, when we did if request obj dot rotate, we can say if. Oh, actually, before that, we need to actually put in category right here, right? Because it's always going to value to false if we're never going to get it. So category right here, just remember to add that here and then add that. So that's why I was saying JSON. You can just add like another parameter right there, like in 2 seconds. Super easy. So we can say if request obj dot category, then there's a category in there. And what we can do to get a cat from a category is we see this right here. And the syntax for this is /cat/ the category. So we can say fat, we can get a fat cat. We can get a cute cat like before. Refresh that, we get a cute cat. That's pretty cute. And we can save that or copy and paste that URL, not save it. And then right here, we can say return. Make sure to do the like the string that is next to like underneath the tilde. So that's like a special templating string that we're going to use right here. And we can just paste that right there. And instead of cute, we want the category. So put a $, open brace, close brace, and then request obj dot category. So that's going to return a category if there's a category there. But if not, then we're just going to return this regular URL right here. And that will, if we pass in a category for there, for request, or if we want a cat from a category, then we're going to return a cat from a category. If not, we're going to give them a random cat. So right here, we have get cat. And this is actually going to do all the work for us. And it's going to return a URL for here. And instead of there, instead of the hard-coded API endpoint, we put cat URL, click, or make sure to save it first, actually, then click run. Oh, this will actually give us an error. because we're not passing enough parameters. Or not, but we still need to pass in these parameters right here. So we can say hello rotate is equal to 13 and category category is equal to cute and flip. Let me just make sure. So flip category rotate text. Yes. Okay. And flip is equal to v. So if we just run that, we should get a cute cat. That's rotated 12 degrees and flipped vertically. So let's deploy that. And it's going to take a second again just to deploy.
So while we're waiting for that to deploy, Gannon, do you want to talk a little bit about what the next step is?
Yeah, so after we deploy this, what we're going to do is we need to actually implement random right here, right? So we haven't implemented random yet, and I didn't demonstrate random on this cat or on this Caddy app yet, but there's an option that you can check called randomize all categories. So if we just check that, we have an option to randomize all categories. So if you just wait for that, it's going to take a second because it's a little slow, but here it is. You get, like, if you notice right here, we didn't pass in anything, right? We didn't put rotate text, we didn't put any text. Everything's set to like default, but for some reason we got this. And that's what random is doing. It's going to give us something completely random. That is a really scary cat. That scares me.
It's pretty possum though, right?
You're not wrong. It is possum though. Oh, I love that. Okay, so let's see if it's deployed. And it has deployed. So what we can do is let's go into Postman, category, cute. What else do we need? Category, text, rotate, flip. So rotate, let's rotate it 12 degrees, I guess. Flip vertically. So we want, let's say a fat cat. I like fat cats. They're so cute. So we send that request with these parameters right here, and it should be able to give us what we need back. Just let it take its time. We get a giant string back, put that in here, paste it. We got Dave, Bob, hello, rotated vertically, flipped, a fat cat. So everything works, which is like, yay. This makes me happy when everything works. Yay. Okay, so the last part, which isn't super complicated, is we're going to need to implement rotate, or random, not rotate, my bad. So for random, what we're going to need to do is say const random is equal to, we are going to copy and paste, because we love that. Copy and paste that. Put random there, and then right here, so we're going to check if request obj.random is equals true in quotes, right? Because if you recall, this query string is always going to pass back information as a string format. So JavaScript does have a keyword called true like that. And even if you do pass in true in the query string, that will not evaluate because everything in the query string is always a string. So just remember that, and we can put true like that. And what we can say in here is, since we want a random cat, we can say, we're actually going to manipulate request obj. So this almost feels illegal, but it's not, because we can manipulate like the individual elements in request obj right here. So we can say request obj.category is equal to blank string. Request obj.text is equal to random text. And this is not a built-in function, but we just haven't implemented it yet. So it's going to start yelling at us. It's not defined, blah, blah, blah. We don't like that, but we're going to do that in a second. So don't worry. And we can say request obj.rotate is equal to random number 0 to 360. And this is not a built-in function either. It's not 260, 360. This is not a built-in function either. So it's going to start yelling at us again. It's going to be like, no, this is bad because it's not defined. But we're going to define it in a second, so don't worry. And last thing, we can say request obj.flip is equal to a little bit of cryptic syntax right here. So math.random is greater than 0.5. So that's just a conditional, right? So this is math class. If math.random, and make sure to put random in parentheses, not like what I just did. So if math.random, which returns a number between 0 and 1, or decimal number between 0 and 1, if that's greater than 0.5, put a question mark, then we want it to be vertically right? And if not, then we want this to be horizontally, no, vertically or horizontally, not both. Okay, there we go. So what this basically means is that if math.random is greater than 0.5, rotate it vertically. But if not, rotate it horizontal or flip it horizontally. So this is just a very shorthand way of getting a random value for flip. And like I said, random text not implemented yet. So we're going to do that right now. So function random text is equal to, I have this predefined array of puns right here. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in here. But you can make your own. So the syntax is just const puns is equal to bracket, open bracket, close bracket, and then you can put anything in here separated by commas. So that's where, like, if you saw possum, that's where that came from. So the syntax to actually return something from this array that's random is a little complicated, but we'll go through it with you, so don't worry. So we can say puns, and we can index this, right? So puns 0 is perfect, puns 1 is poo-poo, so on and so forth. So we can say puns math.floor. So we want a whole integer. We don't want a decimal value. And we can say math.random times puns.length. So this looks really cryptic, right? What is all this? So we're going to return a randomly indexed. So math.random returns a value between 0 and 1, not inclusive of 1. So it cannot ever be 1. It can be 0.99999, but it cannot be 1. So we're going to times that times puns.length. So we're going to get a random value between 0 and 3, which is what we want. And then we're going to floor that. So it's going to be a random number between 0 and 3 whole numbers. And we're going to get that random index from this puns up, or indexed from this puns array. That's what this is. And then what we can do is actually return that. So that's what we're doing right here. It's going to be just fine. And the next function is function random number. It's going to take a min argument and a max. And what that basically meant is 0 or 360. So 0 is min, 360 is max. And what we can do there is return math.floor, math.random times times max, and then plus min. So what that is going to do is we're going to floor it again. So we're going to get a whole integer of math.random times max. So a number that is smaller than the max, but adding the min. So we're going to get, that might sound a little complicated, but what that basically means is that we're going to get value between 0 and 360 right here, because that's what we're passing in. So now this is all implemented. Let's try it. So what we can say, whoops, I did not mean to delete that. So what we can say is text is equal to hi, and rotate is equal to 45, and category is equal to 20, not 123, category is cute, flip is equal to v, and random is equal to true. So once we run that, it's going to take a second. It's going to give us success back, which is good, which is what we want. Let's click deploy. So once that happens,
so let's do a quick recap of what we just did. So one of the biggest steps that Ganny actually just completed is accepting user input. So let me go back to the way beginning. We first started out hard coding in values. And what hard coding means is that we provided specific things in the code. So every time it came back as like, hello, or every time it was rotated 30 degrees, we couldn't customize those settings. So what Ganny went ahead and did with parameters in the URL is that he made it so users can now specify, hey, I want to rotate it 70 degrees. I want to rotate it 10 degrees. I want to put this text on. And as he just did, we can now do random.
Yeah, exactly. So just to verify that, we can go into Postman, our best friend, go random, true, send it. And this should, even though we pass in all this right here, it's going to overwrite that, right? Because after we get request obj, we're going to overwrite that with random. So essentially what that means is if Postman will open, this is all going to be gibberish, and we're just going to get random stuff. Copy that, go into here. Hopefully my computer doesn't crash. Okay, it's okay. Paste that, and we get like possum and a random cat from a category that has random text on it. So if you're calling Postman, it's no longer Dave Bob hello. It's no longer a fat cat. It's no longer rotated only 12 degrees or only vertically. but it's going to be all random. So you don't know, which is kind of scary, but that's the beauty of
The
random.
unknown is what makes it exciting.
Yes, exactly. So the last step of this, right before we get to the front end, which the front end is going to take like 2 seconds, so don't worry about that. But the last step of this is actually to allow cores. So Emily, while I do that, would you just like to explain what cores is? Like, is cores like a course? Because that's what it sounds
Yeah,
like. So what
that's
is
a good
core?
point. Is course a course? Actually, no, it's not. Course is actually what defines for your application what can access it and what should not be able to access it. So it's, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, Ganning, it's cross
Mhm.
origin resource. What's the S?
Sharing, cross-origin resource
Cross,
sharing.
exactly. So cross origin resource sharing. And it's exactly what the name says. It's deciding whether you can use this Lambda function on your website or can you use it on another IP. But in this case, we're going to make it very simple. We're going to let it be accessed from anywhere, right? Getting
Yeah, exactly. So what we're going to do to implement that, we are just going to return this. So I'm going to copy a bit of code in here, and I'm going to walk through it with you. So don't worry. So boom, that just got copied and pasted, and all this like indenting is messed up. So let me just fix that real quick. Type that in. Okay, so this looks beautiful again. So we're going to return some headers. And what this headers does is this is the code that's going to allow cores. And what that means is access control allow headers. This key means what headers we're going to take from the request. So we're only going to allow to take a content type header. So that just means you don't need to know about that right now because we don't have to worry about headers in our code. We're doing that on the front end for you. But that's just like what headers you can take, right? So that's like metadata almost about the information that you're receiving in the body. And access control allow origin means like what domain it can come from. Like, can it come from www.example.com? Can it come from dave.com, bob.com, hello.com? Like, where can it come from, right? Star just means we allow everything. We're very inclusive. So that's like, we can take it from anywhere. So that's what basically that means. And access control allow methods. We can allow any of these methods, honestly. It doesn't really matter to our API, so we can do a post request, get request, or anything like that. And body right here, we're going to JSON.stringify it. So what that basically means is that we're going to put this in a string, right? So stringify, so JSON object, that's this right here. Stringify just turns a JSON object into a string. So this right here is a JSON object. We're going to turn it into a string to give it back to our API call. So just test that to make sure it works. And then we can deploy it. And while that's deploying, we can actually get started making our front end, right, Emily?
yes, and that is, in my opinion, one of the funnest parts because you are able to see both ends come together, the back end and the front end, and you'll be able to see like, what all of this code can be visualized as, because people usually aren't going to open up Postman and interact with your API that way. Usually when you're interacting with APIs, they're probably on a nice front end like the one Ganning's going to show right now. And yeah, exactly like that. Like, have you ever used Postman before this? If you haven't really worked with APIs, probably not. So we are basically building a user-friendly way of getting cats.
Yeah, exactly. So once this deployed, I just want to make sure that it works still, right? But it's going to be a little bit of a pain to copy and paste this back into because once you'll see in a second, how complicated it might be to copy the entire basic before string because it's in a JSON object now, and just scrolling down, that's a pain. But we know this works because we tested this on random, and all we're just returning it in is another object. So we know it works, and lucky for you, you don't have to write much of the front end code because we're super nice and we give it to you. So just head to this URL right here. We'll paste it in the chat when it's time, or if not, we'll get it to you some way. Don't worry. Just head to there. You see this, it's a GitHub page. That's what Emily was talking about with GitHub and stuff, but you don't need to view raw. See this big button called download? Click that, it's going to download a zip file. And as you can see, I've downloaded it quite a few times. It's on number 5 now. So yeah, and we can click on that just to unzip it. And what that will do is it's going to open up a Finder window for us. Just click into that. We get our code made out for us. This is so perfect. Like, we've done everything for you, which is awesome. So what we can do is go to Replit. And what Replit is it's a free way to make a front-end website and a lot of other stuff. So if you want to go explore in Replit, feel free to. We can say, so once we're on Replit, we can click New REPL right here, up left corner. And you might have to make an account if it's your first time. So languages, select HTML, CSS, JS. And the name, we can say, what do you want the name to be? What do you think is a good name for this, Emily?
How about Caddy? Caddy goes batty.
Oh, okay. Caddy goes batty. Oh, let's keep this consistent. Dashes. Oh, that is amazing. Okay, let's create that. And since we're so bad, right, we're going to delete all these files because we don't.
Ooh.
Uh-oh, did it crash? I guess it really did go bad on us. Okay, let's just reload that because
I think it just.
yeah, that was.
I think you like broadcasted that a little bit too loud. You probably shouldn't have said that we were going bad.
That's. Oh no, is Replit actually not working? This is like Replit's issue.
It's fine.
Let's just delete this because if it's gonna.
We hope you don't experience.
Yeah, we hope that you don't experience it during the actual event. So don't worry if that happens. As you can see, it's still deleted, which is super awesome. If we refresh it, it'll all be gone. So don't worry. It might just give that error, but that's Replit's issue. We can't control that. That's like their website's problem. So what we can do is add a file, or not add a file, upload file, because we gave you the code. So select all this, upload all that, click open. Upload folder, we have an IMG folder for you. Upload, trust it, because we said so. And then if you click run, it's like, whoa, that's so cool. We gave you a fully working front end, right? And if you open it, it's exactly what we have here, except better, right? So
we have one more step though, right? We're almost done.
Yeah, we do. We're almost done. So what we need to do last is we actually need to grab the endpoint URL again. So what we can do is, hopefully my Postman doesn't crash. Oh, right here. Okay, here's the URL. So we go into here, grab that URL that we were testing with, include the slash at the end of prod. That's really important. And then go into index.js. Line 56 is what you want to look at right here. See this right here? Replace all that with your API. So it's not using ours anymore. You can be like, I made all of this now. So this is now officially yours. And what we can say is just submit it, test it. And since it's our first time, it's always good practice to just go into inspect element to see like if something went wrong. And woohoo, it worked.
Hey.
Yay. This is so awesome.
All right, let's say we're not done yet. We have to check if it actually
we have to check all this. So this is just like after we deploy to production, we need to make sure it works, right? We get a pretty fat cat, in my opinion, at least. Yeah, so let's just okay, this one is arguably a bigger sized cat. So we can say text hi Emily, degrees to rotate, let's say 5. We want to rotate it vertically. Let's test that. It should rotate vertically, which happens in a second.
Since you're doing a lot of transformations on it, I would assume it takes longer.
Uh-oh, it's upside down. Oh no. But that's okay because we did vertical. So that's what we wanted.
It did exactly what we told it to do. So.
That hurts my neck to try to look at that normally. Oh, it's such a cute cat. It doesn't deserve to be rotated vertically, but it's okay. And last thing we want.
We won't get it again.
Yeah. The last thing we need to test is random. And hopefully it's nicer to us. And we don't have to rotate the cat vertically because it looks really sad when it's vertical. It looks like it's falling from the sky. Yeah. And we get perfect. So if you notice, no more hi, Emily. Bye, Emily. It says perfect now. Yeah. So this is awesome. And we built our fully fledged Caddy app.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shreya. Let's talk a little bit about notifications. So notifications are super important to any application. And today we're going to be using the Courier API, which makes managing notifications super easy for developers. So you can do this through various channels, SMS, email, or even other messaging applications like Slack or WhatsApp. Instead of trying to integrate all of these individually, what you can do is use the Courier API to integrate all of them through one single platform. Awesome. So let's get started with a demo. The first thing that you want to do to set up Courier is go to courier.com and get started for free. This will help you create your account. And once you're done with that process, it'll take you over to the app.courier.com website, which will allow you to actually build the API, build the notification system, and then integrate that into your own application. So go ahead and do that. And then once you've done that already, you will see a little bit about statistics. This part should be blank if you've never used it before. Some integrations, there might not be any integrations yet, which is totally fine. We'll set that up in a second. And then you'll see an option to create a notification at the top right, as well as the same thing on the left. If you click on designer, you can create notifications, you can create automations. So you don't necessarily just have to have notifications sent manually. You can actually set up automations. I think there's various options in here. So you can send a bunch of different notifications at once. You can schedule messages at certain times, set reminders, and you can also cancel those automations so that you can create a template for the type of messaging that you want to do. There's a data section over here, which tells you about your previous messages that you've sent over using Courier, as well as an integration section that shows you all of the various integrations that you have. So either on your homepage or your integration page, you can choose which different channel you want to use. So there's Messenger, there's Discord, there's a lot of different options. The main thing that you're going to want to use over here is the actual API keys from these other platforms. So in order to integrate Twilio or SendGrid or any other channel, you're going to need to have an account on those first. So go ahead and create those, get your API keys, and then add them in here. So for example, if I click on Facebook Messenger, it's going to ask for the page access token. So you can paste that in here, and then you can click on install, which will basically give Courier permission to send out these notifications on your behalf through Facebook Messenger without you having to individually do that through Facebook Messenger yourself. Perfect. So next up, we can actually get our notification system set up within Courier. Once you have your integration set up, go ahead on the left menu and click on Designer. Once you're there, you can click Create Notification. And here you're going to see a bunch of different options. So we want to add email and SMS notifications for the sake of this demo, but you can do whichever you choose, whichever you prefer. And as you can see, Courier can sense that I've already added my SendGrid and Twilio integrations, so it's adding those in directly. But if you want to change that over to a different type of integration, you can do that. You can click on the little settings icon next to them on the left, and you can choose to change up the integration. You can add conditions to all of these different integrations. And there's a lot of other information that you can add in there, like if you're using email, where that email is coming from, and all of the above. You can do similar things for SMS. So if you click on the little settings icon, you can add conditions, and you can see the Twilio is set up over here. Next up, you'll see once you actually click on that integration, whether it's email or SMS, you'll see a little template message over here. So this is your message builder. This is where you can start adding in text. So I can say, dear whoever's receiving this email, so receiver, my name is Shreya. I wanted to say hi. And then you can write anything else you want. You can add images, you can add bullet points, you can really just customize your email however you want to. The really cool thing about Courier is that it makes it super easy for you to manage different channels and make them as similar as possible. or change them if you want. So once you've added some sort of a component to one of those channels, if you click on the other one, it'll give you a library of those options at the bottom, and you can just click and drag and drop them in there. So let's say I choose to add an image in my SMS. I go back to the email, you can see there's an option to add that image in there. You might not always want to do that. You might want to have an image when you're sending an email, but not necessarily when you're sending a text. So you can go ahead and just click on that and delete it, which is totally fine as well. So you can customize different channels. And once you've done that, you can go ahead and click Publish Changes. So once that is published, you can click on Preview and then create a test event to preview your actual notification. So let's go ahead and create a test event. We don't need to add any information in our data profile and override. We can just go ahead and create that test event. And once that's done, we're going to select our preview recipients. So this already has my email in. So let's try and send that preview email and see if I receive it. Okay, perfect. So I pulled up my email and you can see that I have an email over here that says, "Dear receiver, my name is Shreya. I wanted to say hi." So that's just for our own sake to see what that email looks like. If you don't like the way it looks, you can go ahead and go back to design and edit that. Go back to preview, send another preview, see what it looks like. And then once you have that all set up, you can click on send, and this is where all of the magic happens. So Courier will create an auth token for you, which it has blocked out over here so no one else is able to see it, but you can easily copy it over here. And it's created the entire set of code that you will need to integrate this. So if you're writing in Node.js, you can choose to copy it from here. If you're choosing any other language, you can change the language over here and it'll change that starter template code for you. And when you decide to actually use this integration in your application, you can just copy it over here. It copies your auth token, so it'll replace your auth token here with the auth token that is over here. And then you can use this code to actually start sending messages through your own application.